Good morning, everyone. I'm Wesson Al-Qaderi. I'm the chief curator here at CAM, and I am thrilled to be sitting here this morning with the winners of the 2018 Great Rivers Biennial and also our three distinguished jurors. Before I get into the introductions, I just want to say a couple things about the biennial and some of our sponsors and how we can make all of this happen. So I just want to thank Gateway Foundation. Without them, this program would not be possible. And this morning's panel is also generously supported by the Robert Lehman Foundation. We're presenting the 8th edition of the Great Rivers Biennial. As a new curator to St. Louis, it's an honor for me to be able to take this on as one of my first big projects here at CAM. Not only because it's been such a pleasure to work with all three of you, but also because it's been a wonderful opportunity to get straight into the St. Louis art community and to get to know very deeply and very well the practice of three artists working here in St. Louis. So I'm going to do a quick introduction of our jurors and then our artists. And there's so much wonderful information about all of them, but I want us to spend more time talking to each other. So these are sort of like abridged bios. Apologies. So I'll start on the far end of the table. Martin Kersels is a multidisciplinary artist and associate professor and director of graduate studies in sculpture at Yale University. In the middle, Christine Kim is associate curator of contemporary art at the Los Angeles County Museum of Art. And to my left, Lauren Haynes is a scholar in modern and contemporary American art and curator at the contemporary art at Crystal Bridges Museum in Arkansas. At the far end, we have our three Great Rivers Biennial artists. I'll start on the left. Addoley Dzegede is a Ghanaian-American interdisciplinary artist whose work investigates notions of belonging, migration, and hybrid identities. She received an MFA from the Sam Fox School of Design and Visual Art at Washington University in St. Louis. Next to her is Sarah Paulsen. She is a filmmaker and community organizer whose projects have ranged from social justice documentaries to happenings and parades. Sarah also received her MFA from Sam Fox School of Design and Visual Art at Washington University here in St. Louis. And last but not least, Jacob Stanley is a sculptor who focuses on temporary site-responsive installation and large-scale commissions. He received his MFA from the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. So I thought we could sort of start with, we're going to start with a couple of questions. First, we'll sort of go back and forth, questions to the jurors and then to the artists a few times, and then we'll open up the floor for questions and answers. So I'm going to jump right in. And my first question to the jurors, which I think is probably a question a lot of people in the audience and the community probably have, you reviewed over 150 applications for this past edition of the Great Rivers Biennial. What were you looking for? What was your criteria? And how did you make selections when reviewing applications? Whoever wants to jump in.
I'm gonna hold it. Is that okay?
You can hold
Actually,
it, yeah.
I don't hold it because I can't take it out. Yeah, because very strong. I think, I was been thinking about this, and we sort of talked about it a little bit yesterday. One of the things when you're looking at 150 applications and you're trying to find something that's exciting, something that doesn't feel like everything else that you've seen before. And obviously, it's hard to judge looking at things on a screen and reading because nothing, unless it's made for that medium, it doesn't come across in the right way. So you also sort of have to go on instinct and sort of really trying to get an understanding also of what you all are looking for and what does it mean and what is the Great Rivers Biennial overall. So really thinking about the history of the program, the challenge that we've been given, what we've been asked to do, but also really looking at the applicants and looking at the work and trying to pick things that sort of jump out at you in a way that you're not expecting, something that I was thinking about.
I'm going to answer this question in two parts. The first part being more generally, and the second specific to 2018 St. Louis and the world that we live in. when working as a contemporary art curator, whether on juries for biennials such as this, or group shows, or just looking at contemporary artists in general, specifically emerging artists, one of the main things that I look for is a real understanding of what an artist's work is about and how deep that they can go in the mining of what they're engaged in and interested in, and to what level or degree or space they're bringing it into. So whether it is sort of mining, say, European painting and art history, or a different sort of cultural trajectory, or looking at media and how different kind of systems in our mediated worlds work, whatever it might be, and those are just 3 examples that I'm throwing out there, but that I'm looking for an artist who is willing to go deep into that, whether in a research process, investigation, really understanding what those systems are, what sort of, maybe sociological or cultural sort of legacies exists within that. And then from there, bringing it to a place where that subject, topic, or even multiple kind of issues are being addressed to the kind of present day, or understands what other artists or who else has looked at those issues, and kind of, as Lauren is saying, then who's kind of looking at it differently, whether it's in perspective or in the manifestation or the output of the work, whether it's sculptural or video, and why they're choosing that specific medium, how he or she can communicate that. And then specific to Great Rivers Biennial and all of us sitting here today, I think about where we are as human beings, as a nation, in a Trump era, in the era of Black Lives Matter, Me Too, all of that, we open the paper or see our news feed every morning, and all these things that we're grappling with, so that it's not work that necessarily, that I can point it to today, and that doesn't have to be in relation to current events, but whether it's kind of thinking about what films or what videos are being made, but that really kind of places it in the moment that we are today in some capacity. And I think that all 3 of you have done that beautifully.
I don't think I can add much more to that, my 2 colleagues here, so thank you.
Always so complimentary.
Okay, so let's shift gears for a minute then and kind of think about some of these comments and kind of go back to the artists. I wanted to ask you, because I wasn't here at the earlier stage of the process, so you find out you've been selected, you're getting a show, you're getting $20,000, which is quite a generous amount to kind of think about making new work. How did you approach your next steps? Was it like, oh my God, I'm gonna freak out and go on a shopping spree, and were there projects that you knew that you've always wanted to do, and it was like, this is it, this is the moment, or was it about how to use this opportunity, for taking the next steps?
Should I take it out? So for me, is it on? Can you hear me?
I think so, yeah.
Okay. For me, it allowed me to think about processes that I never had really considered, like bronze casting. That was out of the scope of my budget. So it allowed me to imagine what would be possible, and to, like, if I had problems, to hire people to help me, which I did at the University of Kansas, where I was at a residency. I had grad students help me with an emergency at the last minute, and that wouldn't have been possible without the support. In terms of realizing that I had this show coming, it was a bit overwhelming, but I think I just took it one step at a time, and I'm going to pass it on.
I guess the first thing I want to say is that I found that having the individual studio visits was incredibly helpful, because my project actually changed a bit, because I believe what I proposed was more like analyzing my family history, like in like a 15-minute film. And the jurors posed many great questions to me, like, have you considered doing multiple projections? Have you considered projecting on your paintings? Have you considered working more with metaphor and having this be less literal? And so a lot of those thoughts really stuck with me as I began the project. So I actually started to interview my family, and I found that that interview process would have taken a year, probably, like just between like going back and forth. And then I thought about the context of the space, and then I felt like this space doesn't really lend itself to sitting down and watching a long movie. To me, it's much more about like walking around, engaging with something, hopefully coming back to a piece. And so I think just by process of like starting, having these kind of questions in my mind sort of freed me in some ways, because then I thought, okay, I'm at the Contemporary. I have access to a lot of projectors. Like, that is something I would never have, you know? I have this funding. I'm gonna hire like a bunch of kick-ass musicians, and I'm not gonna use audio, like voiceover, because if I can have music, it's going to set an emotional tone that is going to open it up in a different way. So to me, it just allowed me to explore a lot of possibilities that I would not have otherwise. And a friend told my husband, you know, when you get the Great Rivers, like, you have to imagine the work you want to make in like 15 years, and you have to try to make that in 9 months, which is incredibly hard. Like, I'm like tortoise in the hare, where I just start right away, and I just like start really slow, and then I just like keep going, like every day, do a little bit, you know. And I think that the challenge for me was like trying to force myself to understand and synthesize ideas and research in a short period of time. But I am really grateful for this new part of the juror process, and thank you for your valuable feedback. So,
You're quite welcome.
So I think when Lisa called me, I was like, "You're kidding! Like, you were in that room. Are you sure that it's the right person you're calling?" So I was in complete disbelief.
No, it was
and
the
shock.
wrong number, but then it was too late.
It was like awkward, and so and then I just was like, "Oh my gosh, I think I just won this amazing thing. Like, what do I do?" Because I had one piece when we had met like a year. I had one piece pretty well figured out, and then the other two were completely new works. And what getting the Great Rivers Biennial allowed me to do a long 3-month residency at Omaha at the BEMA Center, which gave me 8,000 square feet of working space, also access to great facilities, great help, and allowed me to really make work in a space close to what I would be showing in. And so that was really helpful to sort of like figure out, how do I utilize a massive gallery space. And then I think the other thing the Great Rivers Biennial did was allow me to increase complexity a lot. And I was like, oh, I'll make a few more tweaks, I'll make it a little more interesting, a little more challenging. And then it got really challenging, and then really complicated quick. And so I think having the support, like we were saying, to hire outside help, be able to call people, to work with everyone at the museum, sort of make things happen, is something that I've never had to experience. It's usually me driving a truck and a trailer across the country to unload something and trying to find a friend to help me carry this. And they're like, oh no, we'll send a truck to you, and you can call a clockmaker in Maine, and it's not a big deal. And so that was sort of amazing to just have that support.
And so, kind of bringing it back to the jurors now, you met, it's almost a year ago that you met with all the 10 finalists and then made the selection that you made. From what you can remember about the conversations you had with each of these artists, what surprises you about the work that they're presenting here today? Are there any surprises, changes, shifts, or...
For me, it's not. Wasn't surprised. The surprise came from in terms of like how I see these shows interrelating, because I wasn't sure how they would interrelate at all, or if they would, and in a way that wasn't. I didn't feel like that was what we were doing. That wasn't our job. Is to make a cohesive show of 3 artists. It was a biennial of 3 different artists. So. What I was very pleased as we were doing the walkthrough yesterday to see that to me that there's something that really ties them together, and for me that's pattern, and the ideas of literal pattern, say in Addoley's work, but also that pattern is a reflection upon like colonialism and ideas of migration. And migration isn't like a singular act, but it's an act that is tied to social and political context, and it's like something that it starts in a pattern. There's waves and patterns of migration. Then thinking, which I think ties to Sarah's work, right? Like that her family came to this country under a very specific context, right? And within it, like developed, like spread. The family spread in a certain way because of the arrival of the country at the time, the place of her family coming. And then I was thinking about like the ideas of migration, and then machine, right? And machine is what is also something about pattern, because it makes a pattern upon us. It is something that we rely on. In Jacob's work, there's the patterning of the sound of the cup as it goes from one conveyor belt to another, that starts to develop a rhythm and a pattern. But it's like a pattern that's upon kind of our very being, in a way, because of the expectations that it develops. So that these things are not like on the nose related, but I see these kind of underlying things that I think have to do a lot with maybe St. Louis, in terms of it being a mixed a migrant community, a community that like has a great depth in kind of in industrialism, and now is trying to shift out of that, or trying to work its way out of that, and still like people come here, and it throws the patterns, it throws things off, and I think, you know, by doing a show like this, or doing a show of community, rather than bringing artists from the outside to be in a biennial, you are like having you beginning a discussion, or showing what's the strength within the community. Yeah. So that was my surprise. Surprise! Holy hell, I'm surprised.
I mean, it's interesting to hear you say that, because we were having a lot of internal conversations about when we were doing, you know, our staff conversations about how do we talk about the season and how do we talk about the shows, and trying to find those kind of commonalities. And I think that pattern actually was, I mean, I didn't think about pattern all the way through. So I think that's a really interesting observation. And for me, I was thinking more about how each of the three artists has such a, there's some kind of commonality among the three of you, but that each of you are working in such different ideas and with such different materials, and how wonderful that is of a reflection of the strength of the art scene here in St. Louis. That, you know, that we could, you know, have three artists who have such interesting viewpoints and working with such a range of materials, and how that reflects upon the great, I think, art scene here in the city.
I think when I walked in to see the show, or shows, I was really excited to experience and witness how much the work had evolved since our visits. And oftentimes artists working in studios, and it's a good thing, you're sort of focused on the images or the objects or the things that you're sort of making in that space. The reason why I say that's a good thing is because it's up to curators and museums to guide and shepherd artists to kind of figure out how those objects, images, so on and so forth can kind of be presented and come to fruition within a space. And I think in each of your cases, there was a really extraordinary kind of leap and jump that was made into how the work was presented. For Addoley, I think the choices around specificity of scale and which objects to present, the choice of objects, and how to present those, and then adding in the video, and we hadn't really talked about video, I think, in our visits, but creating some sort of abstract narrative link to the discursive elements in your work that are not visible in showing objects the way that you make objects. And sometimes that can be heavy-handed, but it was sort of just the right sort of touch to bring that into the conversation. I think for Sarah, the step between having content that's poignant and making it pointed. Something that's poetic and familiar and personal, but then making it kind of politically, spatially in ways that really kind of address something and gets to something very clearly. And I think in Jacob's case, that it's not so much about the mechanics of how things work and the kind of smoke and mirrors, which you do so well, but then what those relationships are and how they can be communicated in the space so that the viewer's experience of something, especially with the pieces of paper that have this interactive element of then people putting that paper on and seeing the steel bow, and that sort of small gesture of such a kind of micro action contributing to a sort of macro movement that has so many metaphoric links to where we are. So congratulations to the three of you for kind of taking it to the next level in the presentation of the works.
Not too much to add, except I think, again, less of surprise, but also more of just really loving the way that, we went on these visits and heard a proposal, heard the beginnings of an idea, but then we sort of leave the process. So we sort of say, here you go, good luck, make it work. But that we're really excited to see what happens. But then when we come back, and actually, for me, I was just really, I think, not so much impressed, because I feel like we wouldn't have picked the three of you if we didn't feel you had it in you, but really excited by how you each took this opportunity and took it, like Christine was saying, really to a further point. And so I think that was something that was pleasing and exciting to see.
So I suppose in the fall I came and did visits with each of you, and then those kind of morphed into, depending on each of your kind of way of working, multiple subsequent visits, in some cases lots of emails, and lots of back and forth. And we've had conversations about some of the things that I think, it's kind of nice actually, because some of the things we talked about, the jurors are mentioning. So, I think we talked a lot about, in some cases, scale. We talked about visitors and how they would interact with the work or how they would engage with the work. We also talked about layout and installation and making selections. We talked about editing, speed. I know we had some conversations about speed and of some of the work of your work, Sarah, in terms of the videos. So thinking about all of these things and thinking about the work that's now in the gallery, how do you think, and I think some of you sort of touched upon this a little earlier, has anything in your practice changed, or have you had any shifts in the way that you see or think about your work through this process? Or you could just say no and pass the mic.
No. I think one of the big shifts that I learned was ask for help a lot sooner, because I'm not used to having the resources to get help. I could just be like, fix this problem, please, right? I'm not an expert, but doing that much sooner, I think is something that I learned and wish I did a little bit better in this show to sort of ease a little bit of my stress and anxiety. But I think that was a big shift, and then sort of realizing that there's a whole team to help figure this stuff out. And so I've been used to working with a few assistants or one person, but there is a large group of people that make all the art preparators, the multiple curators, all these things that happen. And that was a new experience in making me think in the future, how do I push my work and designing and proposing things that I don't know how to build yet? I kind of knew. I showed you a very rudimentary 3-gear thing, and then I was like, I don't really know how to take it to that next level. But giving myself that freedom to dream a little bit bigger and then go, oh, I can figure this out over the course of the next couple months.
One of the biggest shifts for me was just the space. Like you said, we talked a lot about scale and seeing what it took to make this kind of exhibition, and to have an idea of the time that goes into it, and the fact that I cannot do all of that by myself and that I needed assistance and help. And also, just through the process, I learned to do things differently, like not to stick so strictly to an idea that I have if it doesn't necessarily matter. So at first I was going to hand batik everything, and then it's like, this cloth is 7 feet wide, and I have to make 2 of them, and then and attach them to each other, and then I have like 6 more of those. And so I asked for help, like, how do I use this, photo exposure table, like how can I screen print with dye, and then I figured out like there's much faster ways to do things and to like let go when I need to.
Yeah.
Okay, I thought of 3 things. One for me, so I mean, I think I had probably applied to the Great Rivers like 5 times, and I mean, my husband Cameron Fuller got it in 2010. But I still felt like it was sort of like Wizard of Oz behind the curtain. Like I really did not understand, even having my husband get it, like what exactly happened. So I think for me, one of the informative things was just going through the process, communicating with you, Wesson, with Misa, and really getting a feel for, yeah, like how collaborative. Like for me, like one of the people that helped install my video pieces was like ended up being my college roommate. So like just how like in a way, everybody's interlinked, right? So it's like I can't be really mean to somebody who's working here because like they're related to me somehow. Do you know what I'm saying? And so and that was actually like kind of beautiful to me and connecting in a way that I was surprised about. And I think that it was empowering in the fact that a lot of times a museum feels very removed from me and I can feel like an outsider in some spaces. So to be an insider and then to have that kind of sense of like connection and feel support and like creating the work was very powerful, and it gave me a little bit of hope. So keep your hope if you've applied like 5 times. The second thing I would say is at some point, I had to like I had to like have more outside people into my studio, which is something I knew, but I think like you were talking about, like where an artist can get so focused into like what they're making, and so all the people I collaborated with, the poets, the musicians, the community activists that came in and talked to me, that became super helpful because it kept the ideas fresh, and it meant that new people were constantly looking at it, and new people that weren't necessarily in the art scene, which also was valuable to me. And then I think the last thing was like, even, I've shown a lot of just like films, and many times when I show a film, I know that somebody's like seen it all. And I found last night that I was realizing, I was like, there might be some people who haven't even seen all of the animations yet, and they're like giving me a response. So just even thinking about last night, how audience is understanding my animations in that context, in that opening, in a short span, was something that I'm mulling over today.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I mean,
thank you.
I would say that as a curator, and I don't know if you would agree, but I feel like the opening is often kind of the beginning. It's like the work goes into the world, and then you start to like learn all of these things about it, because different people come into the space and they reflect their kind of story and their experience into the work. And you, my colleague Jose and I were talking about this, like often you learn so much more from the conversations you have with visitors about the work, even though you've like read about it and you've written about it, but it's like there's a kind of new type of engagement. So I think as the exhibition continues, hopefully there'll be more and more of those kind of realization moments as we kind of see the show progress over the summer. Anyone have any last thoughts before we turn it over to the audience? Any burning things anyone wants to say? Okay. All right. Yes.
Just wanted to, I maybe said this yesterday, but I just wanted to reiterate it, that I felt very welcome by the St. Louis art community, and I want to also say Cam is great, and I was really have felt very well taken care of here.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah?
I just want to say that Misa and Wesson were extremely supportive and respectful. I felt really respected as an artist, and they were very hands-on, which was shocking.
Like
No,
two hands-on?
I mean,
or-
I mean hands-on. Like Wesson was mopping my floor, so I was just like standing on the stairs, like she's mopping the floor. So I'm really grateful for your down-to-earthness and respect of us.
Thank you. Okay, we'll turn it over to audience. Well, I'll pass on my mic.
How are you? I got just a simple, dumb question. Do you collect for the artists the comments and feedback so that they can sort of interact with it with people walking through the gallery? Can you hear it? Am I talking? Oh.
Can you say that again? Do we collect
Do you collect comments and feedback from guests walking through the gallery to offer to the artists?
We don't do it in a sort of formal way, but we do have visitor services guides that are in the galleries, and we always have people at the front desk. So there are lots of opportunities to share. And Misa and I have sort of had these conversations with Carmen, who's our head of visitor services, about doing these check-ins where we check in with her and say, okay, what have you guys heard and how can we pass it along? So it's a little informal, but yes, we try to do that. Thank you. Any other questions?
I wanted to know if the artists knew that they would be sharing this space with Amy Sherald when they were given the assignment. You did not. Well, the reason I mention it is because the pattern and the color and all, you know. Oh, it's because Jane and I were saying that the juxtaposition of her pattern and color and all worked so well with what you all were doing. So that's why I wanted to know if you knew ahead of time.
Any other questions to the artists or the jurors? Misa.
For the artists, now you've accomplished this art display. What is your next art displays of the future?
What's next?
Just answer, you're going to do it on the moon.
Well, I think Crystal Bridges has invited me, and LACMA has a space, I think. So, I mean, we did talk about that last night, right? I actually have I've been fortunate enough to do a public art piece for the city of Richmond, Virginia. So I'll be installing a light piece down there for the next couple weeks. But after that, I don't really have anything except making more stuff in my studio, which I didn't have before the show. So actually having a physical space to make new works, I think, is going to be my next step, and figuring out how do I work in an environment.
My limitation as an artist is that I really put everything I had into that show that I did, and I mean, I think that's like in a way the only thing I know how to do, and also knowing that, you know, I'm from St. Louis. There's a lot of things that are on my mind about St. Louis, and this is like my one platform here, right? So I'm gonna have a baby. And that's crazy, and I'm gonna figure out how to make art doing that. And but also, I mean, I think there's a lot of ideas that I came to in that piece, and like in January, I was like, Sarah, you cannot read any more race theory books because you will just, your mind is already processing all of this, and it's just going to complicate it more, and your audience is going to be like, ah. So I have a lot of reading I want to do, and I have some other concepts and ideas that I'm ready to dive into, and I think also I really got into animation and abstraction, working with the musicians, and so I think that's something that I want to continue to do. I mean, in my own way. I think I always tend to have some figurative elements. But so, and I'll probably just start trying to enter some more film festivals and things like that. I don't know. If you have advice for me, though, I'm also open. So thank you.
I also want to have more time to read. I have work at the airport right now, which is fun because it seems to be the most popular thing I've ever done. Everybody's like, "Yo, work at the airport? What?" Okay. But I also have a residency coming up that I'm excited about in Senegal in July. And I've been wanting to do some work in West Africa for a while, so I'm excited to be able to have a chance to do that. Yeah.
I have a question for the artist. What is one thing that you have learned about yourself as an artist that has helped you grow?
That's a hard one. So because of the show, one thing that I've learned So for me, I come from sort of like a very maker, DIY, blue collar sort of background. So I was always nervous and hesitant to like dream something that I didn't know how to build in my head. I didn't have the technical skill set. And so I think I learned it's okay to give yourself permission to like dream of something and then sort of figured it out. Like I think I was sort of holding myself back a little bit with that skill set, but then being like, just promise it, cross your fingers, and hope you can deliver it on May 7th or 9th. And I think that's one thing that I learned.
Okay, so I told you before about how I kill myself for shows. And so being pregnant was really hard because I could not do my normal habits of like not sleeping and like going to have a drink when I'm frustrated or and lots of caffeine. Any of those things I could not do. And so I really had to learn how to pace myself. And I think Martin was even advising me when I have a kid to do a little bit each day. And I think, I think it was Maya Angelou who was at a graduation speech talked about how like when you sit somewhere, there are all these other people, your ancestors sitting behind you as well. So like I would also say that like me being here, it's also like my parents who like counseled me, like my best friends that I was crying, like, Melinda, I don't know if I can do this, the musicians, like when I would be like, is this good, So I guess like the thing I also learned is like I'm sitting here, but like also it's everybody that supported me to get here and like letting them do that for me, like not feeling like I had to do this all on my own, and also then like yesterday I was just like thanking them, So I think that idea of like bringing your community with you and like relying on your community and like letting your community help you become the artist that you want to be was like very powerful for me, and like not feeling guilty that I did wear myself out, and I did need their help. So
I've definitely learned how much work goes into having an exhibition, and I'm going to look at all the exhibitions I see in museums totally differently. Just the smallest thing can take forever, and you're like, oh yeah, I'm just going to come in and install in like one day, and then you're on your knees on the ground stuffing newspaper, and there's an intern helping you, and your like fingers are dirty. So I've learned like how much I'm capable of. I think I need to find better balance because I didn't get much sleep, and I it stayed till 3, and I have a partner who's an artist, so like he didn't complain. He's like working till 3 in the morning, and we're like exhausted all the time. And I also learned when I was thinking back over the years of my work, I'm like, wow, my partner Lyndon has helped me with everything that I've done. And sometimes I can't carry things, or like I just need someone to be there working at the same time as me, and he's helped me with everything. And we have a collaborative practice, and so I realized that like our practice was already kind of collaborative. That was a thing that I learned about myself as an artist. But yeah, so just learning that like I can't do it on my own, and the value of like the people around me who support me and care about me, and definitely need to balance my life more and like exercise and eat better and all this stuff. It's just like eating garbage, like Sour Patch Kids, and it was bad. But that's what I've learned.
Any other questions?
So first, we're actually all the way from San Diego, down in Southern California. We're stopping in for the weekend, and I want to applaud CAM, the city of St. Louis. This place is amazing. The open space, the free entry for young artists to come in and have a space to develop ideas, and so I applaud you guys absolutely. I applaud the jurors. Great choices, beautiful, beautiful choices, and of course the artists. Beautiful work. But my question is, for my own, I don't necessarily consider myself an artist. Necessarily, more of a kind of a project guy. But I'm curious how for these particular projects at least, how your ideas developed. I find with my own work, with my own ideas, I find like years and years of ideas culminating, and then I'm like, I should try that. Rarely do I actually find the time to try them. As an engineer, I'm kind of like running around being professional most of the time. And then in my spare time, when I'm hanging out with my girlfriend, I like throw myself into a project that rarely gets finished. But my ideas are kind of buzzing. And I'm curious, when you get a work like this, an opportunity like this, do you kind of snap into the like new idea mode? Or are these ideas that have been kind of brewing in the idea machine for years and years, and then you finally have that opportunity to put them on paper or whatever medium you find?
Well, for me, the ideas were already there in like little bits, and then as I started to do the research, the ideas shifted. And as I made one animation, I thought about what felt like it might be missing from the space. And I personally was concerned about making an environment that felt like overly sympathetic to the white immigrant and was like not addressing sort of like broader issues. So that was something that started to kind of play into my how I made decisions with other pieces. But yeah, I think because you have to write a proposal too, though, it's like you have some kind of like nugget you're coming in with.
Can I add to that, like to what you said a little bit, the idea of like when you have ideas and then like life gets in the way, whether it's your engineering job or it's family or whatever, right? This is what artists grapple with all the time, because that they have put I'm not saying they put aside family or they put aside things, but they have to work almost 2 jobs many times in order to do that. And so the idea of like that, when they had ideas, what we looked at as jurors, we looked at portfolios and proposals and histories in order to see that, yes, these ideas, these people know enough and have done enough that they will be able to do this. We weren't saying someone who's never had, so it's a mixture of experience, it's a mixture of imagination, and it's just those things like add into how we ambition, like that they actually see, I can see my work in that big space. I can see my work doing that. And even though I've never done anything that big, I know I've done all these things that lead up to it. And so what made me want to say to you is like, take some time to like do your ideas, because that's the only way you're going to like keep building that record for other people to kind of like see what you're about and what you're doing.
So there was a period of time between when I went to undergrad and grad school where I didn't make art because it didn't seem to have a point. Like I didn't see the value in it anymore because I didn't have an audience and I didn't know what it was for, and I was just like trying to figure out life and being an adult and paying bills and stuff. I think my biggest advice, if someone's trying to like move to that next step is to give yourself deadlines and real ones. So like I would look up exhibitions where they had call for artists, and I would be like, okay, I'm making work and I'm going to submit it by the deadline. And so I just kept doing that for a couple years. And then I was like, I'm going to apply to grad school, but I knew that I might have campus interviews. So I like I worked at a cafe, and I asked some friends from the cafe and like other people to come over, and I did a practice presentation pretending, like they were a committee deciding whether or not I get to, and then I actually had to go do that in front of a group of strangers in Philadelphia. So I got a lot of practice doing things I'm uncomfortable with, like public speaking. But just like forcing yourself to do things that are difficult. In terms of ideas, keep a list, and then whenever you have free time, you can always go back to the list. And sometimes the ideas will be ridiculous. Like I look at my list and I'm like, not gonna do that. And then I get a lot of ideas not from, because you were saying, does it just come to you because you have the time? Or I get ideas mostly at looking at objects that aren't considered art. So I like to go to museums, and like I got the idea for the bells because I went to the National Museum of Ireland, and I saw musical instruments from the Bronze Age, and I didn't know what they were. They just had the word crotal. And then I went in a wormhole, like I have to find out what these are, like what are they used for? And then I found out they're to repel ghosts, and I was like, that's perfect. So just, being inspired by things outside of art, give yourself deadlines, surround yourself by other artists that are excited about what they're doing, and like actually excited about the work, not about the hype or the, I don't know. Like I realized so much how much I'm in this for the art. Like that's what I love, is just being in the studio and working and getting in a zone where you don't care that it's 3 in the morning, where you're just like having fun. So make sure you're having fun. A lot of it will be painful, but like make sure it's something that you enjoy.
Do you want to add something, Jacob?
Just real quick. So I would say, like old sketchbooks, like I would go back through my old sketchbooks for ideas, and things that I thought were new were actually, like I wrote down 5-6 years ago, or like part of the idea. And I think a lot of like adding to an idea, like with the proposal, and then like adding it a little bit more, and then it becomes a new piece, but like it doesn't feel like a new piece because you made these incremental steps. But maybe to them it's vastly different because they just saw this thing way over here. So yeah.
Okay, I think that might be a good stopping point. Before we let everyone go, I just want to say, if you want to hear more from the artists about the work in the exhibition, we have audio tours available on our website. You can listen to them on your phone at campstill.org/audio, or borrow a device from our front desk to listen to those. One last thank you to everybody here. Thank you to our jurors. Thank you to our artists for being here, for pouring your heart out into the projects, for being here more than one time to spend time with our artists and get to know our art scene here in St. Louis. Thank you, everyone, and thank you all for being here this morning.